Well, this morning, I don't know how many of you love animations? You love animations? Yes. I never loved them until a particular point in my life. I had to love them because of my children. And I don't know, many of you may not remember this. I can see you're all young faces here. But those one of the first animations, and we used to watch with our children when they were very, very young, was VeggieTales. How many of you watched VeggieTales? It was all about these vegetables, and there were all these animations on these vegetables. And it was one of the very, very interesting Christian animations that I watched those many years ago. Now, I didn't know this, but the founder or the creator of VeggieTales is somebody by the name Phil Fisher. Phil Fisher was the founder of the creator of the VeggieTales. And he's the voice of Bob, who is the tomato in the VeggieTales. And other various characters. But the tomato there was called Bob. And the voice of Bob that comes through in that tomato is actually the voice of the founder or the creator of VeggieTales, whose name is Phil Fisher. Now, Phil was one of the guest speakers at a pastor's convention many years ago. And he talked about his dream coming to an end. He talked about a big idea. The big idea was actually his production. The production that created and brought forth VeggieTales was called The Big Idea. And that was his company. The company that created this, and Phil's company, was called The Big Idea. And so this company was being sued in the year 2000 for a breach of contract, of which Phil says that they were innocent. You know, sometimes when you start these things, you don't read in between the lines, and you may find yourselves in many problems. So he says they were very innocent when they were accused and taken to court for a breach of contract. Long story short, Big Idea went bankrupt, and Phil lost everything. It was time for Phil Fisher to start again. To start over, to make a fresh start. He said he learned mainly to do what God wants to do when God wants to do it. And Phil went and pitched his new idea yet again to another company. And the company's board asked Phil where he was going to be in 5 years. How many of you have gone to interviews and have been asked, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? So when Phil was there, I was being asked, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And this was Phil's answer. He said, after a long, awkward pause, Phil said, right in the center of God's will. Where do you want to be 5 years from now? He said, right in the center of God's will. What a great answer. Many of us may find ourselves in a place like Phil where we have to make a fresh start. That day, this past Friday, I was at a prize giving ceremony. And I was there with a friend of mine. He's now since relocated to the US. In fact, I didn't know he was coming. He surprised me. He had asked me to come and stand in for him during this prize giving in his school. But little did I know that he was also planning to come. He's since relocated to the US. And at some point, this guy ran a business, actually a franchise for one of the Christian education curriculums in the world, which is in over 113 countries. And he was a leader here in Kenya and in East Africa. And I happen to have been privileged to be the chairman of the board of this board. And we saw this company grow from almost scratch to millions in terms of turnover, and with many people employed working in the warehouse. We had a warehouse, and so we had received curriculum from the US through South Africa, and we'll distribute them all over here in East Africa. And so with time, we began to have difficulties in just the way we did business. And we began to have a back and forth with our South African partners. And those are the days I had to make those many trips to South Africa. And so there was all these issues that were coming in. And then in the midst of all that, COVID also hit. And so post-COVID, come to 2021, just because of, again, COVID, but also more importantly, the disagreements that were there between us and the South African partners who were actually in charge of the African continent, we decided to go separate ways. And this was a very, very difficult moment for this friend of mine, because this was really his business. And so with that, he stopped being the East African representative, and with that, he began to see the business really tumble down. And over the last 3 years, from 2021 to last year, things went from bad to worse. He had to sell a lot of his assets, and things were really, really bad, at a very, very bad space. But sometime last year, his wife applied for a PhD degree in the US, and they made several applications. And out of those many applications that they made, she got admitted in one of the universities in the US, and this came with a full scholarship. The only thing that they had to do was to get an air ticket and pay for their visas to go to the US. And that too was a difficult problem. It was very difficult because of just where they were financially. But God miraculously provided for them, beginning with the fee for the visa, and then later on for the tickets. The wife himself, and their last-born son was going to go with them as a dependent. And so early this year, they did finally migrate over to the US. And this is what he told me, as he was in the American embassy, he was being asked, your wife is going, she's on a scholarship, and what are you going to do? And he looked around and he said, I'm going to support my wife. And this is what he had told me earlier. He told me, my wife has supported me all these years. I think now it's time I also went to support my wife. And so he left everything. He left everything to go and join his wife over in the US. And they're now there, and they are making a fresh start. As Christians, we often will find ourselves in need of a fresh start. When life becomes tedious, burdensome, sometimes it may be due to things that we didn't plan, like my friend, when business goes down. So it could be out of a loss of a job. It could be out of a loss of a relationship, or the death of a dear one. As we are seeing and experiencing as a family. Suddenly there is a start. We have to make a fresh start without the things that we knew before. And starting all over again might be a very difficult thing. It calls for resilience. It calls for a courage. It calls for us stepping out. And sometimes what holds us back is a fear of failure itself. Feeling that we have failed, and just imagining that starting over again may bring us back to that unfamiliar or scary place of failure. And so it's very difficult. So for those of you who are ladies and have house helps, you know that. Each time the house help leaves, you have to start all over again. It's another training. It's a fresh start. And nobody wants fresh starts. As an employer, if one of your best and faithful employees leave and you have to recruit somebody else, it's a fresh start, and it's not easy. It's something very, very, very difficult. And so always we have to go through one fresh start or another. We have to have new beginnings. We have to start something all over again. And so this morning, I want to ask us, have you had to make some fresh starts in your life? Have you had to make some fresh starts in your life? Stepping back from our lives every now and then and re-examining when we have made or what we have is something probably that a very good idea that we need to maybe change or make a few adjustments in our lives. The Bible is full of stories of people and nations that have made fresh starts. In fact, God himself severally has had to make a fresh start. He's had to make a fresh start. And so this morning, as I begin another series that I want to entitle A Fresh Start, I want us to look at, go back to the very, very beginning and see God making a fresh start. And we're going to see a series of fresh starts that God himself makes even as we move on. And for those of you who have lived long enough, you know that in life, there will be a series of fresh starts. Sometimes you arrive somewhere, you think you have arrived, but lo and behold, after a few years, sometimes it's even a few weeks, you have to start all over again and make a fresh start. And so in the book of Genesis, and I'm going to, our text this morning will be taken from the book of Genesis chapter 4, from verses 25, and then spilling over in Genesis 5 and verses 1 to 5. So often, when you read the Bible, there are different chapters. But see, they were not divided in chapters as we see them. They're just a continuous story. And so let's look at this from Genesis chapter 4, verse 25, and then we'll spill over to chapter 5, going from verses 1 to 5. And it says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. And then chapter 5, verse 1, it says, this is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. It's very interesting that Cain and Abel are not mentioned here, but he said, and he named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Adam that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. You know, those days people lived for many years. So if you're 100 years or if you're 50, you're still very young. People lived for hundreds of years. But this story begins in just immediately after the fall of man. And in Genesis chapter 4, as we begin, you read the story of Cain and Abel. And they bring their offerings, as I read earlier, as we were bringing the worship to a close. As they brought their offerings, the Bible says that Abel's offering was accepted before God. God had regard and respect for Abel's offering, and he did not have the same for Cain. In fact, there's a funny story that goes that why did Cain kill Abel? And the funny answer to that question is, I wish I was Abel. Why did Cain kill his brother Abel? You see, brotherhood and rivalry or killing of each other begins here. And Cain kills Abel because he's jealous of the fact that Abel's offering has been accepted. In fact, a more biblical answer to this is that if you read carefully, and I was reading that this morning, it says that Cain gave an offering. If I just say he gave an offering unto the Lord. But for Abel, it says that he chose the firstborn and the fat portions that he brought before the Lord. So just the manner of how we give. And I was talking about this last week, and it reminded us that it's not just what we give, it's how we give. Are we giving out of our right heart? And it's clear here that Cain was not giving from a right heart. Sometimes there can be pressure and we want to give, and we're just giving. But there's that one who gives from a right heart. And Abel gave, he chose of the firstborn, of the fat portions, and he brought them before the Lord. In fact, a similar story is said in the book of Acts. This time different characters, same story. When Barnabas goes and sells his land and brings all the offering at the foot of the disciples in Acts chapter 4. But in the beginning of Acts chapter 5, there's another couple who also go and sell. But this time, then they decide to put a few portions for themselves and bring another portion to the church. They also want to be popular like Barnabas. We have also sold and brought. But the heart is not right. That's why they bring a portion. And God is asking them, you see, all that thing was yours. You should have decided to keep all of it. Don't try to give from that kind of a heart. And so for Cain, he gave, maybe not with wholeheartedly like Abel did. And God regards and has respect for Abel's offering. And because of that, Cain is jealous and Cain kills his brother Abel. And so the verse that you're reading, the portion of scripture that you read, it says that Eve now gives birth to a child, another son. And this one he calls Seth. And the meaning of Seth is, God has appointed for me another offspring. And it's very, very interesting when you read this portion of scripture in verse 26. It says, to Seth also, God gave Adam, after Cain had been killed, Seth also a son was born. And he called his name Enosh. And it's interesting, after Seth has given birth to his son called Enosh, he says, at that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. There was a fresh start. In Genesis chapter 3, after the sin has come into the world, Adam and Eve have eaten of the fruit of the tree that they have been asked not to eat of. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I don't know how many of you have ever wondered, why is it that God said they should not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? You see, only God has a right to determine what is good and what is evil. It is not man's place to determine what is good and what is evil. I think that's the problem we have in the world today. We are trying to define for ourselves what is good and what is evil. That is a reserve for God himself. He's the one who determines what is good and what is evil. And so when man is under the deception of the enemy, thinks that he can be equal to God, and knowing what is good and evil, God then banishes them. And that's how sin comes into the world. And as a result of sin, the consequences of sin are dire. All the problems we suffer in our world and our relationship are as a result of the sin, the original sin. And some of the consequences include the openness and lack of shame between man and woman that was there in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 25. And it says, both the man and the woman were naked and yet not ashamed. That one is lost as a result, and as a result of sin coming to this world. it's a consequence of our sin. In Genesis 3 and verse 7, it says that Adam now is hiding. The person who was open, who was not full of shame, now is full of shame because of sin. That thing is that harmony disappears and is replaced by selfishness and with blaming each other. The person who said, now this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, now is the first one saying, Lord God, it is this woman you gave me. He's actually blaming the woman. And so we begin to play a blame game. We blame others for our mistakes and our problems. The harmony disappears as a result of sin coming into the earth. In the place of friendship and communion with God, God used to come every day in the cool of the day and will fellowship with Adam. But now Adam is hiding because of his fear, because of shame. He is now hiding. So that friendship, that communion with God now is replaced by fear. I don't know about you, but some of us, before we became Christians, there's a fear of God. You don't even want to come near where God is being mentioned. We ran away from God because of that fear. This is as a result of sin. And ultimately, the human beings are banished from the garden. Paradise is lost, and there is curse, there is pain, there is frustration, there is hostility, and there is death as a result of sin. And so sin has come into the world, and so God is here again through the birth of Seth. And he says, at that time, man began to call on the name of the Lord. A new generation God is raising. God is having a fresh start even with the birth of Seth. And it's very, very interesting to see that the descendants of Seth include Shem. And Shem is the ancestor of the Semites. Now, the Semites are the Jews. So if you hear in America, them talking about anti-Semitic opinions and views, those are anti-Jews. And there are many in the world today that are anti the Jews. So Shem is the ancestor of the Jews, and from these people is where Jesus Christ himself is going to come. So God has a plan for the redemption of mankind. God has a plan to restore that which has been lost. God has a plan, but this plan starts way, way, way before, and it starts here as we see another fresh start with the birth of Seth. But that's the final start, because again we'll see later on, after these generations of Seth have come forth, again the wickedness of man is so much that in Genesis chapter 8, God is regretting. And now not regretting in the form of that he regrets having made man, but he feels sorrow, he feels so sad at the wickedness of mankind. And that's when God decides to again wipe out this generation, except for the person that he finds that is faithful, and that's Noah. Again, there we'll see another fresh start. God making a fresh start after he wipes out everything. Everything disappears, is swept away by the flood. But only one person and his family, Noah and his wife and his 3 kids, survive. Again, another fresh start. And so we continue seeing fresh start and a fresh start and another fresh start along the way. And so don't fear. As we go through different seasons in your life, there will always be moments when you have to make a fresh start. There's always a time and a season that we have to move into another season and make a fresh start in our lives. It could be in terms of your career. It could be in terms of something in your life. It could be in terms of relationships. But there's always a time that God is leading us to make a fresh start in our lives. And so often, making that fresh start could be because there must be an ending to what has been there before. We hold on to things so much. We don't want to let go. And sometimes God is saying it's time to move on to the next one. Someone has written a very interesting book, and I will highly recommend this book by Henry Cloud. And the title of this book is Necessary Endings. There are some things that have to end. And they are necessary endings. And sometimes we flog the horse even when it's dead. And we want to continue with this thing. But the time has come that we need to disembark and look for a new one and have a fresh start in our lives. I see, and especially ladies, they're in a relationship, and this relationship, you can tell, this relationship is like that train in Suswa, going nowhere. It's a train going nowhere, but they are still there, and they are stuck there, and I can see it, you can try to show them, but they are stuck there. And one day, one of the ladies was bold enough to tell me, Pastor, but now, if I leave this one, will I get another one? They say, better the devil I know than the angel I don't. And they are stuck in a relationship that is going nowhere. Or they're in a relationship that is very abusive. But they are stuck there. Why? Because of a fear of making a fresh start. Friends, sometimes there is a necessary ending. And it must end so that you can move on to what is next in your life. may I submit to us that sometimes God is waiting for us and has been waiting for long for us to make that step, to have a fresh start, but we are stuck in that same place. We don't want to let go. We become so comfortable. And sometimes it's just a fear of the unknown, because every fresh start comes with unknown uncertainty. It's a different territory. It's a new territory. And because of that, we are fearful. We want to hang on to the old and familiar. You know, the old and familiar is what we're used to. I was watching a movie the other day where this lady she gets married to this a very rich person. It must be from a royal family. And so part of the it's very interesting. It's very funny. Part of the orientation, she's taken to the new house, and that house, the wardrobe is filled with new clothes. And she has come with her bag with her clothes. And she said, no, but what about my clothes? She said, don't forget about the clothes. Now we have our new wardrobe. And you can tell this person is not happy. She's not amused. She wants to stick on to the old and familiar. And that's how we are. We always want to hold on to what we are familiar with. We want to hold on to that which we're used to. We don't want to leave. We don't want to release, even when there's a necessary ending to that which have been, so that we can begin to embrace the new in our lives. And I believe that God is always giving us a chance to have a fresh start. Did you know that every day is a chance to have a fresh start? In fact, sometimes when my day has been bad, the thing I long for is going to sleep. Because I know after I sleep, I'll wake up tomorrow and it will be a new day, a fresh start. Every week is a fresh start. And so as we begin another week, I don't know how your last week has been. As we begin this other new week, it's also an opportunity for a fresh start. Last week may have been bad, but another week God has given to us. We can make a fresh start. We're in a new month now, the month of October. The month of the legends has passed, Roger and Emma. Our month has passed. Now we're in another month of Eric and the others in October. But it's also another month, and each month gives us a fresh start. And not to end there. We are given a new year. And each year is also another opportunity for a fresh start. No wonder we wish each other a happy new year. It's a time to have a fresh start. And so those seasons are defined. They're well defined. We know that a day will end, another day will begin. A week will end, another week will begin. A month will end, another month will begin. And a year will end, and they're ending very fast nowadays. And another one will begin. So as we grow older, it's an opportunity for a fresh start. But there are also seasons that are not clearly defined. And those ones don't have a time span. And we can be in some seasons for longer and others for shorter. But each of those seasons is an indicator that we are having a fresh start. Each season means a fresh start. For those who live in those countries where there are seasons, you will always see that they have sale. When the summer is over, what they do is, and I remember being a student in India, what we'll time, we used to do, we were poor students, so what we'll do is we'll time those sales. And so when the winter, the summer is coming over, is going to end, we begin to buy those things that are being cleared. So because now what they're bringing in are winter clothes. And when the winter is coming to an end, they begin to have serious sales on pullovers and all those nice things, because another season is coming. And we forget that that season next year will also come. So we will keep those things so that when the next season comes, we can be able to shine in those things. Of course, sometimes the fashion changes. So what you bought last time may not be in fashion this time. But it's an indicator that a new season is coming. We can't move into summer with clothes for winter. You can't go into the hot season with your raincoats and gumboots. That is for the rainy season. When a new season comes, now we look for another thing. Now we are dealing with dust and other things. Where Roger stays, when it's the rainy season, is another thing you're dealing with. When there's dust, when it's hot and dry, we are dealing with dust. Those of us who come from Kajiado know that. We deal with dust when it's dry, and when it's wet, it is another thing. So seasons are changing. And each season gives us an opportunity for us to make a fresh start. And so my question to us this morning is, where are you at? Could it be that you are coming to an end of some season and beginning another season in your life? Is it a time for you to make a fresh start in one area or another of your life? Could it be that God is calling us as a congregation also to have a fresh start as we look forward and as we move forward? There's always a time and a season. And as the season comes to an end, may we be willing to let go that which is behind so that we can embrace that which is ahead of us. No wonder God, speaking to the Israelites through the prophet Isaiah, said in Isaiah chapter 43 and verse 18, forget the former things. See, I'm doing a new thing. Can't you see it? Isaiah 43 and verse 18. Forget the former things. See, I'm doing a new thing. Can't you see it? And why God is saying this, I believe, is because these guys were still stuck to those old things, the former things. And there are places and there are people who constantly are, their stories are always about the former things, the old things we used to have. If you're in an organization, and in fact, if you're brought in to lead an organization and you're a new person there, there will be people there constantly reminding you, we used to. Remember many years ago, when I made a fresh start in my life, I'd been working in the corporate, and suddenly I felt that I need to heed the call of God upon my life. I had to leave behind all that I knew and enter and venture into what I believed in obedience to God, what I believed that was God's calling for my life. And so as a young man in my early 30s, I left this high-flying job. In fact, I remember my resignation was with effect from 1st of August. And so on the 31st of July, a Saturday, I was attending a wedding of a cousin of my wife. And in that wedding, I met my MD. And he hadn't seen my letter of resignation. So as we were having cocktail and he was gladly introducing me to his friends and talking highly about me. I wish I had had those things before I resigned. Anyway, I wasn't resigning because of anything, but it's just the call of God upon my life. And so he began to tell me. Well, so I told him I had to cut him at some point and tell him, by the way, you have not received my letter. I have sent in my resignation. And he was very shocked, and he started telling me the plans that they had for me in the organization. It's bad to hear about the plans that your boss has for you when you're leaving. And he began to tell me all these plans, but I had purpose in my heart. Calling was drawing. The purpose was calling out to me. And so I said, no, thank you so much. I will leave. In fact, he even told me, but you can continue being a pastor but still work here. And I said, no, I need to answer to this calling. And so I left. And as I left and joined and became a pastor, I was a pastor of a region that I had been a leader in this region. And our pastor had left and gone to plant another church in Zambia. And so as I'm there, so I'm together with my peers. These guys were my peers. They were leaders like me. And so now I am their pastor. I am their boss. And they were, I'll always, I'll never forget this. There was a guy who constantly used to remind me, we used to. When Nani was here, we used to. Now I'm the new pastor. I constantly being reminded. When the other pastor was here, this is what we used to do. And I could tell this guy is stuck in the past. And for a moment, it used to intimidate me. Because each point you're being reminded that, we used to, when Nani was there, this is what used to happen. And there are guys who will make your life so difficult because they are still stuck on the old and not ready to make a fresh start. They are not ready to make a fresh start with me. I had to come to a place where I had to move beyond this we used to now, this is what you're going to be doing. And so this is a fresh start. It was a fresh start for me. And so in life, there will be those who still are stuck and want to pull you back to what is the old and familiar. But God is calling us to make a fresh start. And to make a fresh start takes a lot of courage. It takes courage. To leave the old, what you're familiar with, to leave what you're used to, takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. I've made 2 serious fresh starts in my life, and each of them has required a lot of courage. And sometimes you make the fresh start, not necessarily because the things where you are is bad. Now that it's easier to make a fresh start when where you are is toxic. You want to leave, you want to remove from there. But sometimes it's more difficult to have a fresh start when everything is working well. When things are still okay, and suddenly you say, no, I need to make a fresh start. And I've seen that's the most difficult. It's easier when things are not working, but what about when things are working? And sometimes even when things are working, God could be asking and calling us to make a fresh start. God is saying, forget the former things. He is doing a new thing. And my prayer for us is that we'll be sensitive to the seasons of life that we are in. We will be sensitive to realize and to know that it's time to make a fresh start. That we'll know that this is my season. The season here is over. Somebody told me a long time ago, don't overstay your season. It's like mangoes. the tree. If you yank it out before time, you'll have a bitter, raw mango to eat. But also, if it passes its season in the tree, it falls down rotten. So you have to pluck it at the right time. And that's the difficult thing with a fresh start. Sometimes knowing when to make that fresh start. Knowing what is the appropriate time to make that fresh start. There's a prayer that I like very much. Somebody once blessed me with those plugs that I put on my desk. It's always been there to remind me. And this is a serenity prayer. How many of you have had the serenity prayer? And it says, God, give me serenity to accept things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can change. And wisdom to know the difference. And that's my prayer for us, that God will give us the wisdom. Because some of us will take a fresh start when it's not time to take a fresh start. But others also may overstay when they're supposed to make a fresh start. And so my prayer always has been, Lord, help me. Because sometimes we just need to accept the situation where we find ourselves in. Just because the situation is bad doesn't mean it's time to make a fresh start. Maybe God wants you to continue there. He's trying to work out some patience in your life. He's trying to develop character in you. He's trying to make you hang in there for a season and for a while. And there have been moments when I stuck. And I stuck a little longer. And I stuck again. And because I stuck there, suddenly a breakthrough came as I persisted and was resilient in that situation. But there have also been moments when I knew I had to make a choice. I had to make a decision. And it's very difficult for a phlegmatic like me. You know, as phlegmatics, we want everything to be steady. Change, there's nothing that stresses me like change. And so we want to hang in there forever. And so when I've made the changes I've made, I was talking to Les Brickman, and many of you know Les Brickman. He was my coach trainer. And he was telling me, you know, with your personality, the changes you've made is unlike you. It's very much unlike you. Because your personality is a personality that will just hang in there and stay there. But I've realized that at those moments when you sense the nudging of the Lord tugging upon your heart, calling you to make those steps, take courage. Take courage. And make that fresh start. You know, Abraham in the Bible was a phlegmatic like me. These are people who don't like change. And why do I say so? If you read the book of Genesis chapter 11, towards the end, you read that Terah, Abraham's father, had begun a journey to go to Canaan. He had already begun the journey. But the Bible says when he reached Haran, he settled there. He settled. And that's where Abraham is born and Abraham grows. And Abraham also is, being the flag he is, he's become accustomed to Haran and he sticks there. And that's why in Genesis chapter 12, it says God comes and tells Abraham, leave your father's house, the familiar space, and move. God knew unless I speak to this man, he will continue staying there. Remember, his father had already begun the journey to Canaan, the promised land. But Abraham settles. His father settled, and Abraham, like his father, settles there. And so it takes God to come and tell him, start moving. And it's a step of faith, because you're going to a land you do not know. You're making a fresh start. You're leaving your community. Some of us sometimes can't understand this, but you know, people lived in communities. It's like trying, you know, there are people, if you told them to go and buy land in another place, they'll tell you over my dead body. They cannot leave their community and go and live in another community somewhere else. Except for one community I know, which can settle everywhere. But other communities are so stuck with where they are and where they have been born. This is an ancestral land, and they will die there. But there's a community, thank God for the colonizers, the British, they destabilized them. So they have become used to settling everywhere. Many years ago, I had gone to help a friend take dowry to Rusinga Island. I'd never been there myself. And so we were booked into a hotel. The only nice guest house that was in that space, things have now since changed, but that time, the only good thing that was there, the only nice place you could sleep was a guest house of one of the research organizations that was working there. So they put me in this place, that guest house, to sleep. So the following day we were to cross over and go into the island and finish our business and come back. And so as I'm in this place and I'm sleeping at 4 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m., a place I have never been myself, being a Luo, right there in Rusinga Island. As I'm there at 4 a.m., I hear a lot of commotion outside the room. And suddenly I'm hearing a terere. And and so I wake up and I mean, am I in Dome? We used to live in Dome that time. Am I in Dome or am I in Rusinga? And shock of shocks. These guys have come, they're buying fish at 4 a.m., they're planning their trip to Nairobi. I said, my goodness, these people will be found everywhere in this community, in this world. So there are people who are comfortable, they can make a fresh start anywhere. But there are others who it will take a tornado. It will take serious things to happen in their lives for them to make that move and to have a fresh start. And so my prayer is this morning that God will give us the wisdom to know the difference between just accepting where we are and how things are, and to have the courage to make the step when we need to make that step and make that move and move into that which God is calling us to, making a fresh start.